Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this month's, well, actually last month's community dialogue on with Blind Spot. I appreciate you joining us, tuning in. We've had some great reaction and feedback from these conversations, and so I'm excited to do today's. We did have a few changes in all of our composition for today's dialogue, but I'm very excited to have Barbara Ingram, who is our Director of Communications here at the Chamber, with us. Harlon Matthews, who is with the Henry County Parks and Recreation, and of course, our chair of our board, Christy Chewning with Central Georgia EMC. So good morning, you three, welcome, and I hope we're ready for some great dialogue.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I just want to start this. This reminded me a bit, a few years ago, it was more than a few, I guess, but I heard this riddle, and it was a father and his son are in a car accident. The father dies at the scene, and the son, badly injured, is rushed to the hospital. In the operating room, the surgeon looks at the boy and says, "I can't operate on this boy. He is my son." What's your take on that? What do you see?
I think I heard that riddle as well years ago before I read this book, and I was trying to remember, did people struggle with the answer back then when I first heard it?
There was, everybody, I remember the discussion on that. Everybody assumed that it was a male doctor, a male surgeon, particularly. Yeah. And so they were all, they got confused on why that could be. And so when I saw that, it reminded me, it really brought into point what this blind spot conversation is. And I think, we all recognize, as we've had these discussions on dialogue and that, we recognize that we do have some biases. We all realize that, and we are trying to, work past them, I assume. But what were some of the takeaways that you got in general as you were reading through this book, or if you listened on audio, however you chose to go through the book? What were some of the takeaways that you had with these biases and your own blind spots?
Yeah, for me, there was things in the book that I had heard of before. One that kind of, to me, a lie is a lie. And so it broke down the different types of lies. A red lie. Of course, we knew what white lies were. You tell a little white lie, but a lie is a lie to me. That's the way that I've grown up. So just kind of to see the depth of how we talk about lies and the different structures of lies, that was quite interesting. But just reading the book in itself, taking some of the implicit bias tests, just makes you more aware of everything around you and the people around you, and just it brings up that consciousness that maybe after reading it, it's going to stop and let me think to overcome maybe that unconscious bias that I might have. So
yeah, no, I think that's a great point, because whether it's part of what we're dealing with right now, and we'll get to that in a bit, but when some lies are socially acceptable, those little white lies that are socially acceptable, and then at what point does it get to the serious level? And I think that's a very great point. Thank you, Christy. Harlon, any takeaways that you had in general from the reading?
I thought it was, like you're saying, how we do things automatic without thinking about it, or possibly even realizing why, or where did that enter my way of thinking. That, and how, group, you're entitled or not entitled, but you're more prone to give favoritism to your own group. And I thought it was interesting with the uncomfortable, egalitarian, how we kind of avoid others because we're not sure how to act around them. And I experienced that a lot as someone, who's a wheelchair user, and people are not sure how to communicate, or should they look at me, or things like that. So it's very interesting reading.
Great, great. Thank you. Barbara?
Well, the takeaways, the main takeaway that I had from this book was, and like Christy, I had heard many of these concepts, but I think, moreover, I've lived many of these experiences that they describe in my lifetime. And I've had some implicit biases that I've had to overcome that have been shown to me through experience, through life, and consciously having to correct my own thoughts and behaviors. Those are the takeaways that were confirmed in this book. That, you know, I think it's a great book for anyone for self-realization, for self-awareness. So it just reinforced that there are probably other areas, and I don't deal with them on a daily basis as I have in some other implicit biases through life and had the opportunity to overcome and correct. So there are some areas that I need to probably focus on that I have not yet had the opportunity to be compelled to correct.
Great point. Great point. I apologize. I'm gonna interrupt us for 1 second and just let everybody know that those that are on Facebook Live and those that are following us on Zoom, go ahead, and if you have questions or ideas, things that you want to share, please put them on the Facebook post, or use, if you can, use the Q&A section of Zoom if you're joining us on Zoom. That's the easier one to monitor, but if you are going to use chat, we'll follow you over there too. But we do want, you know, if you have thoughts or comments and stuff, please share them with us, and we'll make sure that we get that out to the panel and to those that are watching with us. Barbara, that is a great point, and I think part of what we don't realize are some of these biases that are ingrained in us, because, and I think you and I had this conversation last week, where it's societal. These are things that are just, they just come natural to us because that's the way society is. You know, when we look at, if I said you know, what gender would you say a teacher would be? You know, most often people say female. They're nurturers, you know, things like that. If we said the surgeon or something else, you know, a lot of times because of what we see, that's what we tend to associate with it. And I think it's interesting, as they explain, that a lot of times it's not, you know, we're not being evil. We are good people. We are trying to better ourselves and get past these little hurdles and blips in that. But we're so inundated with so much information that our brain has to create these associations and these, for lack of better, these blind spots, that it just automatically makes that decision for us, because otherwise there's no way we could process this information. And so, you know, as we look at that, and Christy, you had said too that you had done the inherent tests at Harvard. Harlon, Barbara, did you also take any of those as you were reading through this?
No.
No. I don't want to speak for Christy, but you probably were right at not doing that, because I will tell you, when I did it, I was completely shocked and amazed at what came out of those inherent biases that I had. Christy, the same for you?
I would have been amazed.
You know, it was really an interesting thing. I think the very first implicit association test was flowers or insects. Well, yeah. Unless you're really into insects, who's going to have, you know, who's going to come up insects? But okay, so flowers. And then I think the next one was a preference between African-American children and European-American children. And mine actually came out that I had a slight automatic preference to African-American children over European children. And so if you've never taken one of these these tests, it's how quick you choose something.
Correct answers, right?
Right. And then so the one that really got me was, there was a test, and it was faces, African American, European American, and weapons. And there was no difference whatsoever on that test.
Wow.
And so, I'm kind of sitting thinking about that one. I did not grow up with guns in the house. I'm scared of guns. But I married someone who is a hunter. And so I really associate guns and weapons with anybody, I guess, is what that comes out with. So there's not one or the other that I would associate a weapon with.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very much middle of the road. So, but those were interesting things that came out. And there are a lot more implicit bias tests that Harvard have out there. I did take one the other day that it was preference between Jefferson and Trump, Thomas Jefferson and Donald Trump. I do not know why there would be an implicit bias test on that, but I prefer neither one over the other. So, so that kind of, to me, I'm looking very middle of the road on some of those tests, but it's that scientific thing. And so I kind of got intrigued and kind of got sucked into those just to kind of see. And if we're not addressing our biases, if we don't know what they are, if we're not addressing them, then how are we growing as a person?
Absolutely.
So, how can I reach out and grow and get to know somebody if I don't know and understand that I have a bias against someone? So, that to me, it's well worth it to take the test and see kind of where I fall. Just it brings it more to your conscious. And that's what the book was saying too. The more you know, the more it brings it to your conscious, so you can choose to do something about it.
And I think you're absolutely right. It's key. We started the dialogues. I think this is our 5th, and it was with the idea, one, that we were opening up conversations within the community, but 2, it was a growing piece for us, a learning process for each of us within the chamber in that, and it has helped with dialogue within the organization. And so I think, at least I feel, Barbara can correct me, but I feel that we have become more open in allowing the conversations about racism, diversity, any of those pieces where you would find biases, and not that we ever, I don't think, had needed permission. I think it was just that we acknowledged the fact that we could have those conversations, if that makes sense. I think it just opened up that comfort that we could have the conversations versus, sitting there and not having them because we weren't sure if that would be acceptable within the building. Is that something, is that about right, Barbara? Am I saying that?
It's absolutely right. We have had some conversations that a year ago, we all are good people, but a year ago, these conversations would not have been open. And Laura and I, Gary and I, Phyllis and I, we around lunch, whatever, but we've had some very interesting and enlightening conversations about, ourselves and how we think in our environments that we grew up in and how that has shaped our thinking. And we all realize that environment, we all knew this, but it is very much part of our conversation now. Understanding each other better is something that I think that these conversations have enabled us to do. Definitely, it has, I think, brought us closer together because we better understand each other.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think that not just the understanding, but I think the fact that we feel more comfortable bringing our whole self to the table and not having to, be cautious of what others might see or feel or say even. That kind of opens it to when you see something, you have to say something. And I think too that, I think we've gotten better at that. we're nowhere near perfect, I know, because even sometimes that you might see it or hear it in the workplace or in retail or a restaurant or something, because it's so subtle in some cases that you don't even know it's happening, that you know, it is not happening to you directly, so you just don't notice it happening. But I think that it's definitely raised our awareness a bit more within the building, definitely.
The book seemed to allude, it gave the example of familiarity. It all begins at infancy and what we're familiar with, and that infant that they were talking about would gravitate or smile, pay attention to things that that infant was more familiar with. Where we fall short is that when we're not familiar with it, well, a lot of people assume it's bad or something negative. So it's going beyond the familiarity that I think where we fall short with acceptance of others and their thoughts and things like that.
No, I appreciate that, Harlan. I absolutely agree. I think where we're not comfortable or it's not familiar to us, it raises that fight or flight mentality to us because we're trying to figure out, is this good? Or do I need to be prepared to run? And so I think that just short circuits a lot of what we have. And that's when the brain goes into autopilot and reacts based on history and what it's been learned over the years. I think that's a great point. Christy, I want to talk to you a little bit, from a religious piece to it, and bringing that to the table. What about, where do you see this fitting in the blind spots, but also community dialogues within faith-based?
Mm-hmm.
How is there a need to have these conversations, and how can we kind of put those together?
There is a huge need to have these conversations, and in the Bible, it says love your neighbor, and if you're not loving your neighbor, then you don't love God. And so it's very important because our neighbor is everybody. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter. We all come from the same father and mother of Adam and Eve. And, so it's very important that we must love our neighbor. We shouldn't have hate in our hearts for anyone. And especially now these days, we can disagree on things, but we need to disagree peacefully, and we need to go and take a very biblical approach to that when we do disagree, and we can come together and we can talk about it, and we can walk away to agree to disagree. But if we have an open heart and open mind to listen to one another and seek that love, there's no reason to have walk away with hate, and so there's no reason to have hate for anyone.
No, thank you. I appreciate that, because I think that there's so much within our culture right now with politics that lack of respect of our neighbor, because we see them as different, and in this case simply different in that they're either red or blue. Mm-hmm. That's the sad part, is now everybody is just being, you're categorized as either a Democrat or a Republican, and whichever side you're on, that other side is the enemy. And so I think that whatever comes of tomorrow or this week, depending on how long it takes to count votes, I am hoping and praying that we're able to get back to a conversation, that we're able to have that respect for individuals, and to be able to open those conversations back up and get to a point where we have some civility in our discourse. Harlan, you had said, that you, I believe you said you use a wheelchair is how you described yourself. And you talked a little bit about how people react to you. you are also with the Parks and Recreation Department with the county. And so I think that I would like to hear a little bit from you, if you would. You know, people assume that in Parks and Rec, there isn't a different ability out there. And so how does that affect you in the day-to-day in your interactions with individuals, but how do you look at programming for a more diverse crowd with your perspective that you bring to your role?
Well, I'll use a phrase. You know, we all say, "Oh, this is normal." Well, we all have our own normal. You know, how I get around is normal to me. You know, so there are varied abilities and normalities. So what I try to do is to help people move past that. And I was sharing this with Barbara the other day. Yeah, when I roll in, you're going to see the chair. You're going to notice the chair. Okay, well, what do I do with that? And I feel like that at that point, and I tell this to the kids in our program, you are an ambassador for those coming after you. So how you act, good or bad, someone's going to assume the person coming after you is going to be the same way. So you have to set a good example. And I want people very quickly to see me just as a person. I'm me, and I just have a different way of getting around, but there's a lot that I do. And so no matter whether it's sports or, you know, at a restaurant, what have you, we have a task in front of us, and that's to be the best version of ourselves and the group that we represent, which are multiple groups, by the way. But we're talking about disability for now. We've just got to be the best example. And you know, an example I can give you, I play tennis, and I play against people who do not have disabilities. I'm the only one in a chair. So the natural assumption is that I'm not going to be all that great. So they're going to just do their little pity pat serve, their little patty cake serve. And when the ball goes by them about 3 times, very quickly, the wheelchair goes away and it becomes about the tennis ball. And so that's an example of me showing them that, you know, they need to realize the abilities I have, not what a lot may consider a shortcoming.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I think that's key, and I thank you. I thank you for that story of being ambassadors and the idea of being ambassadors, because I think that's, for the last several months, those that have tuned in, those that have shared the dialogues with us, and the feedback we've gotten, it really, you know, I called it allies, but I think ambassadors is even better. I think that ambassadors makes it sound much more active than a passive ally who is there by your side. And I think the ambassadors are the ones, like we had said, that'll speak up. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Speaking of which, you know, how, as we, you know, we've talked a bit today and one-on-one, some of us, that as we notice these biases or these implicit associations in that, and we've identified that within ourselves as an area that we want or need to work on. But oftentimes we have interactions in the community, in public. It could be at work, it could be at school, it could be in a social setting, that someone who is near us is taking on a prejudice or a bias. And how can we effectively, or what have you done in the past maybe, that would help to address that bias in person and be that ambassador for somebody who might be slighted by that bias, but it's not necessarily us. So what has anybody had examples where they've encountered that but also addressed it?
I would just say that, you know, when I recognize that with friends and those close to me, you just, in love, you call it out. And have a conversation about it. I mean, that's all you can do. And you can present it, and if there's a heart change on it, there's a heart change. If there's not, you can keep pushing. But if you do it in love and not do it to hurt them, or it is usually well received.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I think too, we talked a bit about the current state of politics and culture in America. It's not limited to any one region or any state right now, but I think there's so much of that, especially on social media, that so many people have opted to take a vacation from their social media because I think it just gets so overwhelming to even try to address it. And then when, I've seen where somebody's tried to address it and it explodes even worse, that, almost like there's gasoline on the fire. And so I think that that's, part of our challenge to, those that join us today or those that view the video in the future is, let's be those ambassadors. Let's get out there. Let's make sure that we're doing what we can, what we're able to do to help bring that awareness to these biases and hopefully address them to correct them. Barbara, were you going to say something, or you were in agreement with us?
I'm in agreement on what
Okay.
you're saying, and I love that. I love that concept too about being ambassadors, and I love the concept of calling people out with love.
Yeah.
And that is harder to do these days than you might think. It's easy to say that, and I totally agree. But I've been in the position of having to react or not react to, things that are being said, or biases that are overt, and it's really hard to react with love in those instances. So that's one of the characteristics that I truly want to work on, because I have a tendency, it may not come off as love. So I do want to work on that. I want to work in that area of presenting a better way to people with love. And I think that reaction would probably, like Christy said, always get the heart change, but you never know what may take place in their minds and in their hearts later on when they have a moment to think about it. I had an experience last night I witnessed from the other room where I think she's 8-year-old niece apologized to my 30-year-old son from an encounter that I was not even aware that they had 3 weeks ago. And this little 8-year-old girl, I want to apologize to you for what I said to you, because I can't speak for my other cousin, but I just want you to know. And she went through the whole thing. I didn't even know what had transpired, but I'm listening from the other room. And my son almost broke down in tears, but he was just so moved by that she had thought about that at 8 years old. He remembered, we talked about it later, he remembered when the discussion between the two little nieces to him, and he told them at the time, I don't like that. I don't like what you all are saying about me, and it doesn't sit well with me. And he was kind of, I guess, firm about it, but he moved on. But she thought about it. 3 weeks, 8 years old, and she made her way to apologize. And so there is hope for us.
Yes, there is.
If we start embracing these concepts early in life, and if we teach also, each one teach one. So yes, there is hope for us.
That's great. That is such a great story, and I think that it's, in this case, it's the reverse of what we're used to seeing, where it's the adults that is pushing those biases onto the children, and now hopefully it's the child then that's giving this eye-opening education to all of us hearing the story. I love that. I also think that when we do take that stand, if we do interrupt and stop whatever that injustice is. Even if it's not me, if I'm there as that ambassador, a lot of times that victim thinks that they're all alone. I mean, I've been there where I've had, biases directed at me, and you feel like you're all alone and nobody says anything, and then it just, you internalize it and it eats you up and everything. But I think the more we're able to come and stop, intercede on behalf of those that were the ones it was directed at, I think that creates a better community. If that makes sense. It makes them feel they're not alone, but it also shows them that they do have ambassadors that are looking at that bias and not accepting it and not owning it.
Joe, I
Mhm.
think there was a place in the book, and I can't tell you the page number, but there was a place in the book that talked about the scores of youth in taking exams or taking the tests are changing now, are reflecting a more open society, a more forgiving and more less biased society growing up at these very young ages, that these test scores are already reflecting that the youth today are not as prejudiced or biased about the same things that some of us who have lived in a different time, a different era, and had different stimuli to help shape our biases, that they are coming along with a better mindset than some of us nowadays.
Yeah, I know that is my hope. I don't know if some of that is that they're, as they see and hear more of it, if that changes what their mindset is, or if they're able to stand strong with that. I know, as I was thinking about it this morning on the way in, again, I appreciated the appendices as much as the book, if not more, just because I am a data geek. And I loved to hear some of the research that they had going on in that. And I guess it hit me this morning, there's this talk that we don't have racism in America, that we don't have injustices in America, that this is silly that we even talk about it, because with the Civil Rights Act and all of these other acts in the 60s, that took care of it. And having the formative years of my life being post 63, I'm not aware of the segregation and the Jim Crow laws and that. And so I think there is a part of me that does assume that is history, and it's not the case. It still is ongoing. We've seen it really bubble to the top in the last year or two. And so I think that we need to continue those dialogues of what people are experiencing, because it's tough if you are the subject of one of these injustices. But I think that by staying quiet, you help it to perpetuate a bit, because it doesn't seem like it is such a huge issue within our society. Does that seem to make sense? Is any thoughts on that, or is there any? Am I completely off base on that? I mean, I came from the north about 18 months ago, and it is a different. I get. We joke about it internally in the office, but it is a whole different mindset that I have in coming down to Georgia. And, and so I'm kind of looking at that as well as, those were the biases that I had from being up north. But it's, in many, many cases, they're unfounded.
Well, I think that a clear example that people could relate to what we're saying, if you've not read the book, but what you were just saying about being from the north and from the south, just think about the food choices that we make, having grown up in the south or having grown up in the north, and having to defend or talk about why you like certain foods. Grits, for example, we love grits in the south, and I know lots of my northern cousins and friends, you know, they prefer potatoes for breakfast, which I'm like, that's not going to work for me on a daily basis. But those are the things that we grew up with. Those are the influences. Those are the food choices that our parents made for us. If we had grown up in the North and been exposed to the same food choices our parents made for us there, we would like potatoes for breakfast every morning instead of grits. It's just that simple. It's what we have been exposed to. It's what we have, the choices that have been made for us. It's the environments that we grew up in that influences our thinking. And it's just as simple as being from the North or being from the South and how we've been exposed to things growing up. That's, without reading this book, can help you relate to some of the biases that we already have that we need to take a closer look at. It's right to like grits and it's right to like potatoes. It's not wrong. Either one of those is not wrong. So let's just take some of those common sense concepts into other places in our lives. If you've not read this book, there's opportunity for you to learn from it too. And if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it. Blind Spot. It's available at Story on the Square.
Yes. Yeah, Barbara, thank you. I think that's great, and I love that the subtitle of the book is about good people, because you know so much of our angst as individuals is, oh, if I own that, then I'm not a good person. If I really acknowledge that, then I'm a bad person. And so I think that really throughout the conversations here, and the authors in doing their research are very careful to make sure that they put that into a perspective. You know, there was the I think it was the third chapter where they were doing the bug and flower test, and they got into some of the other areas, and the responses were, well, am I racist? Am I biased? You know, all of that, and that alone is not what makes you racist. It's just that's the subconscious that you have. You can change that. You can own that. It's how you act on it, and it's how you perpetuate that. And so I think that those are some key pieces as we look to improve ourselves. Harlon, I want to go back to you a minute, and I want to go back to that ambassador and what Barbara was just saying about how we can, you know, we can change, and we can, and especially the youth of today. I want to give you kudos. You know, you play tennis in a wheelchair, and this is the first experience that a lot of these youth get in, you know, in interacting with someone who is differently abled than them. And so I think that you showing them that you can still play tennis and still win in the tournaments and that you do, that opens up their mind that maybe, you know, there are other things that they might already have preconceived notions of that are wrong.
And where do they get those preconceived notions? From parents.
Yes, sir.
Example, when I'm in the store and there's a mother and her children, if I had a penny for every time I've heard or I've seen the mom put her hand in her arm in front of her kids and move them out of the way and go, watch out, or excuse me. Everybody wants to say, excuse me. So those are things they learned from their parents or their groups that they've been a part of. Those are learned responses. And so when I encounter things like that, I try to put a good spin on it, you know, or I'll communicate with them. And, you know, like if a kid, a little bitty 2-year-old is, what is he in? What is that? Look at those wheels. And mom is going, you know. Yeah. But kids are asking what we're thinking. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that why shouldn't you be able to ask a question? And what I've learned is that if you get a negative response from whomever it is, related to disability or not, if they're come back at you negatively, they're struggling with their situation. So I just try to be positive about it. And if mom is like, don't ask that, or come over here, I'm like, no, it's okay. I'm like, you like my wheels? Yeah, and just, and kids are more open and more susceptible, and they're little sponges and they're learning. And the only negative or not ideal responses they're going to give is what they've already heard. And so we fall short with not letting them form their own opinions.
No, I think that's absolutely wonderful. I think that especially, up until a certain age, they're naturally inquisitive, and depending on how we react to that, if we share that information and help educate them, that changes that in their minds versus hiding it, telling them no, almost dismissing it to the point that it's a negative piece, that's what they retain. And so depending on how that interaction is how they're going to grow with that. That reminds me, I think it was about, 2020 has been more than 1 year, I can tell you that. Probably about a year ago, there was a video that went viral. It was, it was during the pandemic, I believe. And it was two little boys. I think they were probably about 3 years old. And they used to play together a lot in their neighborhood, and they hadn't seen each other for weeks or months, because of isolation, quarantining, and that. And they saw each other on the street, and they just took off running at each other. Do you remember that? One was African American and one was Caucasian. Do you remember that? I mean, that's that age where this bias and discrimination that does not exist in their minds. It's how, as they grow, those parents and the adults in their lives, the teachers, the different institutions that they deal with, whether it's education or healthcare, any of that can put those, can start planting those seeds. And so as we approach, we're about 45 minutes into the conversation. What are some of those things? And Harlon, I'm going to look to you from a government perspective and from a Parks and Rec perspective. Christy, I'm going to ask you too from a service perspective, but also an organizational perspective. What are some of those things that we can do to address those? I guess to outsmart the machine for ourselves, but also for those that interact with us. And how do we, become more cognizant? I know policy is affected, but what if we can't get a policy passed? What are some of those things that we can do that we can address these biases from within those? I know we don't have anybody from healthcare, unfortunately, today, but what can we look at as we start addressing some of these from an institutional perspective?
Go ahead, Christy.
Thanks, Harlan. While I'm answering that, just because it's on my mind, I really want to commend Harlan. When I was in Leadership Henry, we had a day that we went to Locust Grove High School, and Harlan had set up an opportunity for us to play wheelchair basketball. I am horrible at basketball. I am 6'2". That's an immediate, people think and ask, did you play basketball? No, I did not. But I had the opportunity to play wheelchair basketball, and it left a great impact on me. But 2-3 years ago, my son came home from school and said, this guy came and brought wheelchairs to the school, and we got to play wheelchair basketball. And I'm like, oh, that was Harlon Matthews, I bet. But that left a great impact on him as well. So just being able to go out and show people a perspective of that is just great. And Harlan, thank you for doing that, because that does help with those biases and those perceptions, and to realize, hey, that's really hard. It really is hard. And you really have to be a talented person to be able to play that. And, but, just from looking at it organizationally wise, this year, the Henry Chamber, we did put out a statement against racism and involved with things that were going on in our state house and Senate, and just we want to take a stand against racism, and that's important. If we can't get policies in place, that's we understand that, but I still go back to you treat everybody the same. And in the book, it did talk about how our ancestors lived in, essentially, I'm going to call them small bubbles. That's not what they called them in the book. But so you didn't see much diversity, and you didn't have the opportunity to really experience other than that small group of people that you were with. So my biggest thing is in an organization and in your life now, we have such more opportunities to experience other cultures. And I encourage everybody to do that. You're just so much more enriched when you have that ability to go and experience cultures and realize we're all the same, no matter what. Some might be economically less advantaged, some might be more advantaged, but as humans, we're the same. And just teaching that and being aware of that is great. One of the things in the book as well too, it talked about minimizing the impact of biases, and something that was done with within the whole music industry as far as orchestra goes, is they started having blind auditions because your maestros and your orchestra players were pretty much all male musicians. And once they started having blind auditions, the number of women in orchestras went up exponentially because there was not that bias there that men were the maestros when it came to music. So doing things that you can go as blind in your auditioning, looking at resumes, scholarships, because I handle scholarships at the office. We do that blindly. And so you don't know really who you're looking at. Those things help with getting those biases out. So if you've got an unconscious bias to something, if you look at things blindly, that really helps.
Christy, I just want to, before I go over to Harlon, I just want to follow up with you too, because you did say, basically, I'm paraphrasing here. This is my poor skill here, but it's get out of your own bubble, visit other cultures, visit other things. And I know you and your family have done a lot with students from other countries, international students, foreign exchange students, and that.
Yes.
How has that impacted your family and your sons?
You know, that is really a great experience. We've had 3 exchange students, and we've had a German exchange student, one from Finland, and then last year we had an Ecuadorian exchange student. And you're bringing them into your life, but you learn from them as well. So they come to learn about the American culture and experience America, but you learn just as much from them. And we travel to Guyana, which is in South America, and that gets confused with Ghana in Africa, but we travel to Guyana. We have dear friends in Trinidad, Tobago, and my husband also travels to Haiti quite often. And so the more culture that you get and the more you see and the more you talk to people, the greater it is. One of the things with our friends in Trinidad and Guyana is they are more open to having these conversations that we're trying to force ourselves into now, that we're afraid to have the conversations. They're not afraid of these conversations.
That's great.
And so it's very interesting to go somewhere, but the bias that's there is they kind of put Americans up on a higher plane because we're from America. And you know, it's a very interesting dynamic there. My husband's a pastor, and if somebody knows that they have a pastor from the United States coming, more people are going to show up to hear that American pastor preach. So that is a very interesting dynamic. But reading through this, I thought about that. That really is a bias, and it's almost a disassociation bias. But it really, I encourage everybody to, and well, I've had the 3 exchange students, but we also have had a college student from Nigeria as well live with us over the summer. And so I've always said that some people like taking in stray dogs. I love taking in people of other cultures and learning about them and just sharing my home with them. So.
I think that's wonderful, and it is such a great learning experience.
It is
for all involved. Absolutely. Harlon, any thoughts on that, or as we close out the hour? Any last minute thought or last item thoughts?
Yeah, you asked, like, as a programmer or you know, someone administratively with Park and Rec. I'll use the example of our kids' wheelchair basketball team. There are different skin colors. There are different disabilities or conditions or diagnoses. There's a lot of different things going on. Some push faster than others, etc. But it's incumbent upon me to figure out how we take all of these differences and bring them together as one to be a team. And while little Johnny might have a more pronounced diagnosis of cerebral palsy and his arms are kind of like this, well, little Johnny's got a job to do. And I'm going to figure out what that job is. And of course, when he doesn't, Coach Harlon will let him know. Because I'm not going to treat him any different. But it's understanding, just taking a moment and looking at the differences so that I can move past the difference and understand their strengths. And then bring everybody's strengths together to create the best possible team that we can. And what's so amazing to me is that I'm learning from them.
Yeah.
You know, what they're giving me, not just that good, warm, fuzzy feeling, but the lessons that I'm learning from them are much more valuable than what I feel like I'm giving to them. So I think the key word here is acceptance. And not only recognize the difference, but accepting it. And you know what? The way, Joe, that you'll get people in the South to eat potatoes for breakfast, call them taters.
Taters?
Was that a bias or what?
Thank you.
Probably
Thank
the
you.
truth.
I need to try the taters to see if I like them. I may, and I may be onto something. If I don't give it a moment and try it and understand it, then I feel like I'm selling myself short and you as an individual.
I appreciate that. I that's wonderful. I appreciate that. And I think that the story you have for the team and how you are working with them all as individuals to bring them together as a unit is the same thing that we all do in our homes. If we think about it, we look at everybody's difference within that house and we try to figure out how that team functions together. There's no reason we can't do it socially, whether it's at work or it's within our church group or another organization. I mean, we do it often in other ways. We just forget to do it where we spend a lot of our time. And so I appreciate that. Harlon, I don't mean to put you on the spot, and I should have asked you this before we got online. But Christy did say that you did do the wheelchair experience for the Leadership Henry as well as for the high school students. And that, do you have programs in that you offer, either you personally or through Parks and Rec, that will work with organizations and other groups to help them understand, the different abilities?
Yeah, I call it, disability awareness. And I mean, we go to all as many schools that will want us there, or it doesn't have to be a school. It can be an event or what have you, whether it's doing a tennis exhibition or bringing chairs, and literally kids love it, getting in the chairs and experiencing it. Adults as well, Christy and her group. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of reaching out, and we're involved with a lot of other organizations where we partner with them to do things like that as well.
That's wonderful. I cannot thank you enough for your time today, Harlon. And if anybody wants to reach out to you to find out more about an event or a group that they're working with, they can find your contact information on the Parks and Recs tab of the county website. Is that correct?
That's correct, under the therapeutic recreation.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I hope people will take advantage of that. And Christy, thank you, as always, for your leadership, but also your participation today and the great insights. Barbara, anything you want to add as we close out the hour?
Well, I was thinking about the chapter that talked about categories and how we place people in categories. And that was such an interesting chapter, because I think the conclusion was we're going to place people in categories, and we just need to be aware that we do this, and because we're human and we're going to do that. But we have these concepts and thoughts about these different categories, and we might need to want to re-examine what we think about different categories. You're going to place people in categories, but we need to re-examine, look at how we think about the different categories, because we might decide that we like potatoes for breakfast.
That's right. There's a number of ways you can prepare them, Barbara. It's not just a potato. Cheese is always good. So I want to thank you all, the three of you, for your time. Those that have joined us online, and those that are watching this as we post this out there to social media and YouTube. Thank you all. I cannot express enough my appreciation to those that have participated over the last 4 or 5 months on these conversations. Just the fact that there is such an interest, it moves me that we can have these conversations and hopefully make a positive impact. This is the last book discussion that we're going to do for 2020. We are coming back later this month of November, and we're inviting back all of our panelists if they can join us, and we're going to kind of go through each one of those conversations and maybe anything that's happened since then, any comments that they received out in the community, any ideas that they've had that have changed their mind from when we first talked a couple months ago. So please be looking for that date. I'm thinking it's 2 weeks from today, but I'll double check and we'll get information out to everybody. 2021, we will be continuing these. I think, for the first quarter, it will be virtual again. We're going to look at ways that we can make it more inclusive in a true community dialogue setting, because we've been relying on the chats feeds and that as we've gone through the discussions, and I know that eliminates several, but we want to look at that as well and hopefully make those more inclusive. And I know that 2021, Christy, thank you for your board leadership, but I know that we had our retreat last week. We had some great conversations with the board on what we want to look at for the year ahead, and how a lot of this needs to now move even further along into action. And so we're looking at entrepreneur support and different things like that we can do to help minority businesses. And so please be watching. I know 2021 is going to be a great year ahead for the Chamber and for Henry County businesses, as we look at some of these partnerships and collaborations that we've established and how we can move those out. And finally, if you haven't voted, please get out there and vote tomorrow. I don't know if there's going to be lines or not, but do use your voice, use your vote. Let's continue to make a difference in Henry County, in Georgia, and in the United States. This is an important election, and we need to get out there and make our voices heard. I thank you again, all three of you, those that have joined us online. Any last minute thoughts anyone has as we close out the hour? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I always feel so great after these conversations, and so I'm on a high right now just from the conversation. So thank you all very much for joining me today. Have a great day.
You too, Joe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.